A chimpanzee wandered into a bar, which was a sight that completely astonished the bartender. The chimpanzee casually sat at the bar and ordered a martini. The bartender was in disbelief, but thought to himself, "Well, this is unusual, but I suppose I'll make the drink." So he mixed the martini with precision and skill. When he carried the drink over to the chimpanzee, he was further amazed to see the animal patiently holding out a $20 bill to pay for it. The bartender couldn't believe what was happening. A chimpanzee not only ordering a martini but also having the money to pay for it. Trying to act as normal as possible, the bartender took the $20 and went to the cash register to get change. As he stood there, a thought crossed his mind. He decided to see if the chimpanzee would notice if he was shortchanged. So he returned to the chimpanzee with just $1 as change. The chimpanzee didn't react or say anything. It simply started sipping its martini calmly. The bartender watched, curious and bit anxious, wondering if the chimpanzee was aware he had been given the wrong change. After a few minutes of silence, the bartender's curiosity got the better of him. He decided to break the ice and said to the chimpanzee, "You know, we don't get too many chimpanzees in here." The chimpanzee looked up from its drink and replied nonchalantly, "At $19 a drink, I'm not surprised."
A very successful farmer from Texas becomes curious about his ancestry. After some research, he discovers that his roots trace back to a small town in Ireland where his ancestors were also farmers. Excited, he decides to visit the town to learn more about his heritage. After arriving in Dublin and driving for an hour, he stops at a local pub to get a drink and hopefully gather some information about his family. The Texan sits down at the bar, orders a pint, and strikes up a conversation with an Irishman sitting next to him. He shares his story and explains why he's there. The Irishman responds,
"Well, I've never heard of your family, but I'm a farmer too. What's farming like in Texas?"
The Texan replies,
"Farming in Texas has been very good to me. If you start driving west from my property in the morning, you'll drive all day without reaching the end. And if you drive east the next day, you still won't reach the end. The same goes for driving north or south all day."
The Irishman nods and says,
I know what you mean. I've got a tractor like that as well.
Hey.
A man accidentally wires $500,000 to the wrong account. He calls his bank manager for a reversal, but the manager says, for that amount of money, the dispute process would be very time-consuming. For a quicker solution, you would be better off contacting the recipient to send the money back. The man figures the chances of someone simply sending back $500,000 upon request are very slim, so instead the man comes up with an idea. He gets the account owner's number from the bank manager and sends them a text message. The message reads, "Hello, dark and worthy recruit. I believe you have received the $500,000 wired to you. It's for your initiation into the eternal brotherhood of the dark underworld. Our meeting is scheduled to take place tomorrow at 12 midnight. A week after your initiation, your siblings and parents will die. This will unlock the wealth and riches awaiting you after we conquer this world. But in case you're not ready to join, please send back the $500,000 immediately, and you will be taken off our list of recruits." About 30 minutes later, he gets a response back. "Please send another $1 million. My two friends are interested."
A U.S. Marine colonel was preparing to give the daily briefing to his staff. As everyone was gathering around, he was waiting for the coffee machine to finish brewing a fresh pot. Looking to engage his team in a light-hearted conversation before getting down to business, the colonel decided to ask them a somewhat personal question. He started by sharing a bit about his previous night, mentioning that his wife had been quite affectionate, which resulted in him not getting as much sleep as he usually did. With a slight grin, he posed a curious question to the group. He wanted to know their opinions on what proportion of sex was work and how much of it was pleasure. The responses from the staff were varied and interesting. A major was the first to respond, suggesting that it was 25% pleasure and 75% work. A captain then offered his viewpoint, feeling that it was an even split 50% pleasure and 50% work. A lieutenant shared his thoughts too, saying it was 25 to 75% in favor of pleasure, but this could change depending on how much he had been drinking at the time. Despite these answers, there was no clear consensus among the officers. Curious to hear a perspective from someone lower in rank, the colonel turned to the private first class, PFC, who was in charge of making the coffee. He asked the young PFC what his opinion was on the matter. Without any hesitation, the young PFC confidently replied, "Sir, in my opinion, it has to be 100% pleasure." The colonel, a bit surprised by this straightforward and assured response, was curious to know why the PFC felt this way. So he asked the PFC to explain his reasoning. The PFC looked at the colonel and said, "Well, sir, the reason I believe it's all pleasure is because if there was any work involved, the officers would definitely have me doing it for them."
One night after watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, a man and his wife went to bed and the man was getting very frisky. He asked his wife if she was in the mood. His wife answered, "Not tonight, dear, I have a headache." The man replied, "Is that your final answer?" She said yes. "Okay then, I'd like to phone a friend."
Jab out there and then... Carolina's eyes closed. She doesn't even see that thing at all. It's the ones you don't see.
A woman was about to get married for the 4th time and went to a gynecologist to make sure everything was all right. The gynecologist ran some tests and came back after a while dumbfounded, saying that according to his tests, she was still a virgin. He asked her how she could still be a virgin after 3 marriages. The woman said her first husband was a doctor, and all he wanted to do was study it. Her second husband was a professor, and all he wanted to do was talk about it. Her third husband was a contractor, and whenever the subject of intimacy came up, he said he'd get to it next week. The doctor, now curious, asked her how this 4th marriage was going to be different. She replied, "That's easy. I'm about to marry an attorney. I know I'm going to get screwed." A woman gets on a bus holding her baby. "That's the ugliest baby I've ever seen," says the bus driver. In a huff, the woman slams her fare into the box and takes an aisle seat near the rear of the bus. The man seated next to her senses her agitation and asks what's wrong. "The bus driver insulted me," she shouts. The man replies, "Well, he's a public servant and shouldn't say things to insult passengers." "You're right," says the woman. "I think I'll go back up there and give him a piece of my mind." "That's a good idea," the man replies. "Here, let me hold your monkey."
A woman was preparing to go to Italy for a 2-week training session for her company. Her husband drove her to the airport, and as they arrived, he wished her a safe and pleasant trip. Before she got out of the car, the wife turned to her husband and asked, "Thank you, honey. Is there anything special you'd like me to bring back for you from Italy?" The husband, with a mischievous grin on his face, chuckled and said, "How about a gorgeous Italian girl?" The woman didn't respond to his joke. She simply smiled quietly and got out of the car to catch her flight. 2 weeks later, the training was over, and the husband went to the airport to pick up his wife. On the drive back home, he was eager to hear about her trip. He asked, "So, honey, how was your trip?" She replied, "It was very good, thank you." Then, remembering his playful request before she left, he asked her with a wink, "And what about my present?" "The gorgeous Italian girl I asked for." The wife, who hadn't forgotten his cheeky request, answered, "Oh, that present? Well, I did what I could on that front. Now we just have to wait for 9 months to see if it's a girl."